So this past weekend, I managed to get second in FMC at the North American Championships with an average of 23 flat. The solves were 24, 22, and 23. So I figured I'd make a video, go ahead and show you guys what I did on each solve. So this first solve was a 24. The scramble was pretty terrible. There are, I believe, 6, 8, 6. That's the EO count. And the scramble has no sub 5 EOs. So not a very nice scramble to start off a championship with, but I did manage to get pretty lucky and find a solution in like the first 10 minutes or so. So what I did for EO is on the 8 bad axis right here. The bad edges are these 3 right here, these 3 right here, and then 1 and 2. So what you can do is you want to set up to like RL in this case. So all you want to do is get these 2 bad edges up to right here. So I did U2, F2, which keeps these 2 bad edges on RL. Then you have them right here, so just U, R, L. So that's EO in 5 moves. I knew on the scramble I would have to likely check RZP in 6 because there weren't, and not only were there no sub 5 EOs, but I also didn't have very many EOs in the scramble. I think I only had like 30 or something like that. So I knew I would have enough time to kind of thoroughly check for RZP in 6 on most of these EOs. And I mean, ideally, I'd only get something that's like a move or 2 longer than what I normally get. So like a 23 or 24, which I knew would probably be fine on the scramble. So what I did from here was just U, and then you can see that sets up to DR minus 44C. Unfortunately, this does look nice, but there's no way to get to like a super short DR on here. I ended up using this to get another 24, but I'll show that afterwards. So what I did is I saw this, I figured, okay, I may as well switch on this, try to see what I could find. So from here, when I looked on the inverse, this kind of looks like a shape that I would just immediately scrap because I've kind of built up an understanding of what minus 4E4C shapes can be solved in like 7 moves or less. And this doesn't really look like one that I'd look at. My mindset though on this attempt was just, you know, get as many DRs as possible. I knew it's likely that I would probably have to rely on getting good luck after DR, which is what ended up happening. So this state can actually be solved and gotten to DR in 8 moves. So 6 move RZP plus 8 moves to get a 14 move DR, which is what Chris did. But once you get to solving DR in more than 7 moves, it can be kind of tricky to get the right thing first try, just because, you know, if you're decent at FMC, you're never really going to be doing RZP states in more than 8 moves, just because most likely that means you're doing DR in 12 or more moves, which isn't ideal. But what I ended up doing was B2 R2 to make this kind of shape, and then doing B prime L2. So now we have these bars set up, which we have to do F prime B L2 and then FD to get to DR. So I kind of just chose to do DR with the first thing that came to mind, and then my intention was just to likely scrap it. I didn't know how long that was. I was just doing this on a cube and not really writing it down because, you know, 9 times out of 10 I would just immediately scrap whatever I had afterwards. Normally I would just do like a CFOP solution after seeing the DR minus, but like I said, here I just wanted to try as many things as I could. But then of course I did DR, not knowing how long the DR was, and I just saw this and I was kind of like, what the heck? So just B to U to F prime to get to HTR, and even more crazy, this looks like the freest HTR I've ever seen. So it doesn't just solve itself too easily, but what I did was D2, F2, R2, and then, well, I was more so thinking about it from here. So D2, F2, R2, and then that leaves you with this. So you can just do D prime, U prime, B2, DU to solve the cube. And I specifically kind of lined it up like that because I knew my last move on the normal was U. So if I ended with a U move on the inverse, then that would cancel 2 moves. So that gave me a 24. I didn't know how long the DR was until I wrote it all out, and I was kind of just like, good lord, I just used a 15 move DR and got a 24 off of it. Like I said, this DR minus sequence actually just equals this if you do what Krish did, and then also Krish used U prime instead of U here. The two EOs that would give are HDR equivalent, but in my mind, I didn't check both of them because I figured, okay, if I got a 9 move finish off this 15 move DR, odds are there isn't gonna be something better than that, just statistically speaking. So all I did kind of once I had this was just try like inserting a bunch of moves before this HDR or doing this in a different way. That didn't give anything better than 24. So as soon as I found this, pretty much once I tried that, I just moved on and tried to not really look at this anymore, just because I figured it would be a waste of time. Unfortunately, I could have gotten 22 like Krish, but this is the other solution I ended up finding in that time. If my computer will scroll down, there you go. So using the same EO, U to F to URL, going back to this, you can see, okay, U sets up these two bars very nicely to just get to DR on the normal. I didn't start with this just because I recognize that the shape probably isn't going to give like a super great DR, but as soon as I found that other 24, I went back to this. So I did F, B prime, R2, and then B2, F2, D for DR in 12 moves. And this is 2C3, which, you know, could give me a 23, 11 move finish. It's possible. So what I did from there was switch to the inverse. And then to get to HDR from here, what you want to do here, it's not really in a good state. You have to do some sort of half turn beforehand because we want to get to -4 corners. If you just do a quarter turn here, that's going to give you with 6 or 2. So I did R2 before and then B, and that lined up the edges in a way that I could get 4v2 minus 2e and just set up to like RU to R prime pretty easily. So then I did L2 to match those corners together, and then here it's pretty easy to see what the rest of HDR is, just D2B, D2B prime. And then again, I was keeping in mind that my last move on the normal was D. So I kind of have two options for my leave slice. I can look at it both as just leaving S, because obviously I was doing B and F moves, but then I can also likely leave this slice. So that kind of gave me some more freedom with what I looked at after HDR. And here it's pretty easy to see. You can just do D2, L2, D2 to leave both S and the E slice. That also cancels one move, so that ends up leaving double slice in 21. That's pretty good. That could give you a 23, likely, if you solve both in like +1 move or something like that. So to solve both of those slices, I used RNS. So let me set this up. So right here, this is at this point in the skeleton, you can undo these moves right here. And then all I did pretty much was see, okay, my E slice is set up like this. What if I just, you know, do U prime D before that, and then do pretty much the same solution to get to the back to this point. So R2, L2, U prime, R2, U2. That solves the E slice. So now we're left with just the correct S slice in 23. Given that this is 3 quarter turns, it's very likely that could be solved in only one more move. So the best solution I ended up finding was +1 though. It's just if you replace this part with, you can see, you know, make this block B2, F, and then L2, U2, F prime for 24. I was pretty annoyed that I spent the rest of the attempts pretty much finding another 24, but after this first attempt, it kind of weeded out a lot of the good FMC solvers. A lot of people got either really high results or DNFs on the scramble, so I'm pretty fortunate that I got a 24 on it. So this next solve was a 22. The scramble is quite a bit better. What I ended up doing was on the blue top axis, there are 4 bad edges. They are here, 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 and here. So there isn't a great way to do this on the normal, but what you can do is check doing either U and then switching because you have 4 bad edges, or doing D and then switching. So what I ended up doing was if you do D and then trace out these bad edges, this is going to go here, this is going to go here, this will go here, and then this is going to stay right here. So you can pretty easily see that on the inverse, it's just going to be B prime U, to get to EO. So then after I wrote down the EO, I started looking for RZPs. On the normal here, what you can do is see that all this is just B prime F away from JZP, because these corners right here, once you do that, are all going to be facing the front and top, and then we have an even amount of misoriented corners. So what you can do from here is whenever you have JZP, you can look on the side and kind of gauge what the RZP will be like. So here you can see, just like, because RZP on the blue top EO will be both on here and on here, you can do the same thing with JZP. So if we look right here, there are, once again, 4 unoriented corners and 6 edges out of DR. So we know on the inverse, it's going to look something like this, which is the same pretty much as RU2R prime, just sliced. So we know that likely the inverse will have some decent way to get to DR. So if we switch, that's exactly what we see. So we have these 2 bars lined up already. So all you have to do is just R2, F2, R2, and then now we're set up to like R dy2 ry prime. So all you have to do is B U2F to get to DR. And here this is 4B2 minus 6 edges. So again, we're going to use like the same trigger that we used to get to DR as an HDR. So what I ended up doing was U2, L2, U2, and then now just L prime U2R to get to HDR. And again, I was keeping in mind what the last move on the normal was. Since it's B prime F and this whole thing is all JZP, there's a good chance that leaving S slice in addition to M, which is the correct slice, will likely give some sort of good double slice. So from here, all I did was, I was kind of thinking on this side here, you could do B2 and then U2, D2 and L2, which leaves us with both the M slice and S slice in 21 moves. So I started by solving the wrong slice here. So I harnessed at this point right here. So I want to try to find some way that can solve the S slice. So what I started with was by widening this F move right here. And then if you do B prime, that's essentially the same thing as just rotating the cube. If you're doing F wide and then B prime. So that gets rid of 2 moves. And then L2, D2, U2, and then B prime F. Well, that didn't work, but you get the idea. But essentially when you widen this F move right here, that changes this L2 now becomes a D2. So really the sequence of moves right here is now D prime, R2, F prime, B, D2, F2 to solve the wrong slice in -1 move, even though you inserted F prime B here instead, because this L2 now becomes a D2. It's 1 move shorter to solve wrong slice, which is really pretty lucky. Unfortunately, I did not have the same luck with solving the correct slice. The only thing that you can do from here is, because the sequence is so short and it's only 2 QT, all I did was just L2R and then D2 RF2 LR to solve the correct slice in +2 moves. So 20 to slice, 22 is pretty unlucky, but that did put me in a pretty good running going into the last solve. So the last solve was a 23. This was by far the best scramble. What I did for EO is on the inverse right here, you can see it's pretty easy. There's just these 4 bad edges, which you can get to EO, but just by doing RDB. Then I switched, and then one of the RZPs you can do is just U2R to get to DR minus 44C, and this looks pretty promising. All you have to do is just D prime R2 to make these blocks, and then B2, the edges get correctly aligned, and then U D2R, which gives DR in 11 moves, and this is 4B2 minus 6E once again. So what I ended up doing was switching, and then if you change that last move to B prime instead, it looks pretty obvious what you have to do to get to HDR. So again, similar to the last solve, R2, D2, R2, and then D prime, U2, L prime, or D prime, L2, U prime to get to HTR in 17 moves. And then here, I didn't have to do any sort of double slice. All you have to do is just look on here. You could do B2, D2, B2, R2, B2 to leave the E slice in 22 moves. And then to solve that, all I did was harness at this point right here, and then you can just widen this D2. So D2, B2, and then pretty easy to see how the cube solves from here. It's just doing D prime U2, F2, U2, U. So that is leaving the slice and solving it in one more move. So I ended up missing a 20 on this because one thing that you should always check for whenever you have 4B2 is doing the HTR in 4 quarter turns instead of 2. What you can do is just do one move into 2C3 and then try setting up to like some short triggers from there to get to HTR, which if you do that, there's a pretty easy way to get to, I think, 20 to slice or 19 to slice, something like that. That then gives you a final solution in 20, which I normally do check that all the time. I think the reason I didn't end up checking it in this scenario was because I already had a 12 move finish, which is pretty good for the subset. I mean, that's about average, maybe a little bit above average. So my kind of thought process was, this is probably the best that I could find on this DR. So then I just moved on. I knew in my mind that 23 wasn't good enough. So I figured, because going into this last attempt, I was tied with Alexi for a mean of 2, but he had the better single. And because the scramble was so good, I figured that he would most likely get at least a 23, possibly better. And if he gets a 23, just like how I did, then I wouldn't beat him. And at this point, Christian and Evan were quite a bit ahead of me. So I figured that if I settled with this 23, then I would most likely lose the podium. And it's possible that Mini or Carrier or someone in my mind would find something a lot better on the scramble. So I ended up just kind of doing this finish as quickly as possible. I found this in like 15 minutes, and then spending the rest of the attempt looking at a different DR. I ended up having, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I had this 10 to 4C3. Unfortunately, this is 13 optimal, so I spent the whole attempt finding a 24 off of this, but even then, optimal for this wasn't better than 23. I also had this 9 move DR, but it was pretty trash. But unfortunately for Alexi, I did feel bad. He got 24 on the scramble, so I narrowly beat him. And even more unfortunate, Evan ended up getting a 25, which is how I tied second with him. Both of us got 23 flat means with 22 as our best singles. Evan was even more close than me to finding the 20 on the last solve here, which would have let him win, but it's still cool that he managed to podium in 2 different championships after 10 years of cubing. And both me and Evan have been doing DR for a fairly short amount of time, so I'm pretty happy that both of us managed to do well at this comp. I've been doing FMC pretty seriously, probably pretty much just my main event for about the past 10 months. So I'm very happy that I ended up getting second at this comp. I hope to, I mean, this is my PR mean, but I've just been pretty unlucky with my rounds recently. So I'm hoping to beat this pretty soon, and I'm very happy with my second place. So thank you for watching, and